I thought that was absolutely crazy. And I told you and I told Chris that was no way that was going to happen. We could put it up there as this big, hairy, audacious goal, but it wasn't going to happen. And I remember standing there, popping that champagne and thinking, we did it.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Exit Is Now podcast with me, your host, Scott Snider. Today in the studio, hanging out with, I would say, I was thinking about this in my reflection notes, Josh, and I always call you like one of my best friends, but really at the end of the day, I think that you're one of the closest people to a brother that I actually have. So as if you don't know who Josh is, you'll certainly get to know him on the show today. Formerly at EPI in our work capacity, he's our longest running employee here, celebrating or within his 8th year here at EPI. But I've known Josh since we were probably like 21 years old, and I was having a limo night, and you walked into my house in Olmsted Falls, and I shook your hand because our one buddy, Scotty, actually introduced us, and I think we've been friends ever since. And certainly when you talk to me and Chris, we consider you one of our family members, certainly here at EPI and outside in the world. So welcome.
Yeah,
welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. This is exciting.
Yeah, right. You might have seen Josh back talking on our behind the scenes and exit planning summit podcast. I wanted to have him back on the show to dive a little bit deeper into what I would say we talk a lot this year about the evolution of exit planning. And a part of the evolution of exit planning is actually the evolution of the Exit Planning Institute, the organization. And I think that if you look, Josh, at your 8 years here, that you would experience some pretty impactful growth and some impactful moments. So I think for the audience, there's a few things, right? There's a whole conversation around what it's like to grow a rapidly growing company and what's that a part of, what's it like to work in a family business, and then your personal trajectory coming from an industry that's completely not what we do to into this world, and now sitting on the executive team as our manager of strategic relationships. But nonetheless, you've been a core guy. So let's start by going all the way back to 2016 when you first started, to kind of set that up for everybody that is a longtime follower or even a new person inside of the EPI community. Back then in 2016, what Jot was walking into, he had 500 CEPAs, so the whole community was 500 people strong. We had maybe 100 or so people at our summit that year. We had our goal was to have about 30 people in each CEPA program, and there was a whole 5 employees here at EPI. You being one of them and really one of the core people. And I think you hear a lot about this, Josh, and we'll segue into kind of hearing where you kind of started. But I think as an owner, I think that many CEPAs, we talk about this a lot, is when you know one of those owners that kind of started a company, which I think a lot of the times EPI is kind of this startup company, that I wasn't necessarily hiring people for their skill sets. Specifically, I was hiring people that I knew were ambitious, that could help us grow, that we could trust, and that we could have fun with. And I can remember approaching you and saying, Josh, I think you're in logistics right now, bud, but I need somebody to run events, help manage our customers and members, help sell new stuff. I don't really know what the role is, but it sounds like you're going to be the guy for the role, and here we are. So kind of take us back. 2016, I had approached you about joining the company, and you're kind of walking into something unknown. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, and I think the role I walked into was even a little bit unknown. I think if we take a step back a little bit further to the summer of 2015 was when we initially started talking about me joining EPI. About a year later, maybe mid to late 2016. Yeah. And we were talking 2015 was really your first year, kind of a full year of running EPI, you, Scott. And
that's true. That is true.
And so we talked that summer and was interested in the idea, and I was living in Columbus at the time. And then over Thanksgiving, I was back home here in Cleveland, and we sat down in your upstairs office and talked some more about it and said, yeah, that still sounds great. And I think I went back to Columbus, and it was maybe 2 weeks later, I get a text from you. I'm sitting in the truck terminal and it says, how do you feel about running events? And how soon can you start? So we expedited the conversation. You asked how long I needed to relocate. So we accepted a job offer early January and moved up here in February. Started on February 15th of 2016. And it was, I think the job description then was a little bit of everything.
If there even was one.
Right.
Even if I slid a piece of paper and said, hey, Josh, like, here's the description. You're so right, though, when you think about it. We had bought EPI in 2012, late 2012, October, November. Our first full year running it was 13, but it was primarily run and overseen by my dad, Chris. And then the summer of 2014, we moved the company to Cleveland, and we wanted to really harness our growth strategy. And I said, Dad, let me go in and just run this thing for our ownership group, which was me and Dad. And so, yeah, you're right, though. That's an interesting perspective, is that in 2015, it was the first year that EPI was kind of in my hands to run. And I wanted to surround myself with people that I could trust and could kind of ambitiously and aggressively grow this. And, yeah, it was a quick turnaround. I remember that spring probably I was hanging out at your house with your mom. I always remember this story. And Mrs. Koza was like, gave me a huge hug. And she was like, thank you for bringing my son home. Because you were down in Columbus, and for our audience that in Ohio, right, we're up in Cleveland, which is where EPI is headquartered, where Josh and I are from. But Josh at the time was living 2 hours south in Columbus, Ohio, and Josh is from what I would consider a very tight family. So having her eldest son away from the home had to be tough for the Koza family. But nonetheless, yeah, you come in and no job description, maybe no formal one at least.
Sure. Yeah. And it was a little bit of everything. It was, hey, we need to sell some CEPAs. I need you to run the events. Probably have to help out a little bit working with chapter presidents, build some marketing campaigns. And it changed a little bit every day. I think it was, I'm a pretty organized guy. And so I like to know ahead of time what my day is going to look like. And it wasn't really that. I think it was a little bit of you just figure it out as you go. And I think that's part of being a part of a startup, if you think about it that way, or a young entrepreneurial company with 5 employees, is everyone does a little bit.
Well, it had to be a big change, right? Like if you came from a logistics company with, I don't know how many people were sitting in that terminal with you, but more than 5.
Yeah.
But going from this like more of a corporate, I would say like corporate structure, and then moving into like a super entrepreneurial role. And we always laugh. I was laughing with Paige just the other day about this, our director of marketing, as she starts to build out and coach her team. And I laughed because her and I experienced some of the similar problem in that we have a very entrepreneurial view. So I say, here, Josh, this is kind of what needs to be accomplished. Here you go, figure it out, and we'll come back later. So I don't give a lot of coaching and advice, like maybe to my flaw at some point, but nonetheless, that has to also be how it was. Like, dude, can you give me more perspective or insights or how to here? I'm like, no, just run the event, man. Figure it out.
Yeah. No, I think that was a big change for me. Certainly, is coming from a corporate background or working in corporate settings, was basically being told what to do or having a clear direction, doing the same thing every day, more or less. And so to have a project or to say, hey, here's some order forms or BOLs from the event last year, go ahead and make this event happen, was certainly a bit of a challenge, but a cool opportunity for me. So I
give you certainly with only 5 of us there and being close to me and my dad, and we had my brother-in-law Dan in the business, who's been on the podcast too. Again, it's like a real good look into like truly a family business at a very very, very tight family level. I think one of your biggest objectives that year was to sell, I think, 50 CEPAs into a CEPA program. That was one of your first major things. And it was I had to be kind of a cool role because you were managing the event, but also helping sell CEPAs into the event. And so I think I said to you, Josh, we'll pop a bottle of champagne if you can get us to 50 CEPAs. And I think we did. Tell that story.
We did. Yeah. The goal was 50 CEPAs in the May 2016 class in Chicago.
Right.
And so we had that deal. We'd pop some champagne. We'd go in early and celebrate before the program. And so I hung up a giant sticky note on the door with a countdown. And every time we sold a CEPA, I'd go over and check it off as we ticked down. And so we made it. And so we did. We went in early. spent the weekend in Chicago, had a couple of friends come in.
Yep.
Ashley came up with us
Yep.
and went to Soundbar, I think it was.
Yep.
And
I don't even know if it's there anymore.
Bought that bottle of champagne and celebrated. And
A bottle of glowing Dom for our audience, if you want to know what kind. It was like a Magnum bottle of glowing Dom back when we were very young men.
Yeah, it was a pretty cool moment to be standing there and have them bring a glow-in-the-dark bottle of champagne up to the booth.
Yeah, after
something I certainly
50
had never
CEPAs,
experienced
yeah.
before. But great, obviously great moment, milestone, I think personally, but for the company too. And then great CEPA program. I still remember that one was the first one I was a part of. We have a number of chapter presidents and really influential CEPAs in the community from that particular course. But I think, and we were just talking about this before the show, is what you don't realize with maybe people don't realize with a smaller entrepreneurial company is that that's not a trend or that's not necessarily automatically sustained. And so it wasn't but 2 or 3 months later, we're sitting in a Monday morning team meeting. We're approaching a in-person program in San Francisco, and I think we had about 10 or 11 people signed up, and we needed 25 to make the numbers work. And Chris was upset we weren't hitting our numbers.
Yep.
And Scott was subsequently upset with us for not hitting our numbers. And he stood there and he said, Chris told me if we don't hit this number, I'm going down. And if I'm going down, you're all going down with me. So I will always remember sitting in that small lounge in our Lakewood office and thinking, is he serious right now?
Like I just can't. I've just moved back to Cleveland. Am I going to lose my friggin' job?
Yeah.
It does showcase like the stress of a business too, right? Because we're trying to figure it out again. Like I consider Josh like one of the originals with me and Chris, and we were like, I came from landscaping, you came from logistics at the time. Like at the end of the day, like we had a big month with the 50 CEPAs in May. But we only had two CEPA programs too back then, right? Or did we have 3? We have one on the West Coast.
3. I think we did 2 Chicago, one California.
Two. Okay, yeah, and we were sitting in that. It was a fall class back in Chicago.
It was San Francisco. It was a summer in San Francisco. Yeah,
and we were upset. And you got to understand the stress levels of the owners too, because we had just taken over really 3 years ago, right? And then I had taken over just a year before that. The year after that. So. At that time, again, being a young man too, your business partner, who happens to be your father, has put a lot of trust into what we're doing here. And I probably my emotional intelligence, or whatever you call that, my leadership skills probably could have improved. But nonetheless, my militant style of leadership back then was saying, dude, if I'm getting fired, you're all getting fired and we're going down. But I think that showcases, right? If you said that to a regular employee, I think that they just quit. But you actually stuck around, and not only stuck around, but have been here 8 years, right? Like, so there had to be, I think again, that's why I refer to you as family, because it's like your older brother saying that to you, and you're saying, well, I love this guy. Like, he's just upset. Let's keep it going. But you had to be, and maybe what I didn't realize back then too, you had to be maybe even a buffer between me and then our other employees that also, maybe knew me, but certainly weren't as close to me as you.
Yeah, that was certainly a shocking moment for me to sit there and hear that. But I think that was one of the many moments over the last almost 8 years here at EPI, and it leaned into our friendship more than just a professional relationship. Is that for me, knowing where you were coming from, how much you cared about success and succeeding and hitting numbers and wanting us to grow, it was ultimately motivational to me, right? I think right after that meeting, I went back in the office, shut the door, and turned the lights off and made some sales calls. And we ended up making the program happen. We didn't have to cancel the program. We sold it. So I think it was...
And I think we oversold. Like we went past, ended up going past the number.
Yeah, I don't remember the final number, but that went well. And I think it's a reflection point to say just for you, how much from a leadership perspective has changed over the last 8 years. I think for others, I think it was crucial that we had some core. You had some friendships behind too at that time, because to your point, I think people probably would have left hearing that type of message or that style of leadership from time to time. And but we stuck together and made it happen. And
nonetheless, certainly when I think back then too, again, company of like 5 people. To us having a lot to manage, but you're looking in perspective today, right? The complexities in our business today are much greater than they were back then. What were some of the other struggles that you kind of saw back in the early days of EPI? So before the show, we were talking, for our audience, I kind of break EPI's history by maybe 2 or 3, maybe even 4 milestones. So before Josh, when we bought EPI and moved it to Cleveland, our offices were in the back of a cigar shop. So it was me and then one like office administrator that had a catch-all kind of role that you kind of came into. And then we outgrew that, so we had to get like a real office. And even though that was kind of like C-class space, right, it was still what we could afford, and it was a formal office. So that's another milestone, right, from like the purchase to move to Cleveland, cigar shop office, Lakewood office, and then Westlake office. But if you think about that time, because I think that we had just moved into that office when you had started. And right, because we went from basically me and another employee to me and 4 other people surrounding me. So we certainly needed something more robust or something larger that we could grow into. And but there had to be like outside struggles. One was that, right? Just if you think about the stages of a business, Josh, like we're super focused on revenue growth. That's what we were really focused on then. And it's natural. You read a lot of these business books, right? Talking about these stages of growth in companies. I always reflect on our 10-year, 11-year journey at EPI because it literally is that startup company, right? We're super focused on making revenue so that we could pay our expenses. There's not a lot of cash left over at the end of the day. But talk to me about like what that was like entering that company, and then for the next 16, 17, and then 18, the 3 years that we were in that Lakewood office, what that looked like for you. Because by the time we ended that year, we had sold, or ended that 2018 run before we moved here, we had sold about 300 CEPAs that year. So still pretty big growth.
Yeah, I think that stress that you felt as an owner, that you and Chris felt as an owner financially, was felt by the company. Not necessarily that we were looking at the numbers every day, but I think you could feel that. I think you could sense that that's where the motivation was, is we need to hit these numbers or we won't continue to exist, right? And that's true. That's certainly a different position than we're in today. So I think that there was, again, I think that the people we had in place at the time were able to use that as motivation, because we did make it happen, right? There were times when we didn't hit individual numbers, but we continued to grow. I think just thinking back to those days, our sales process, right? We didn't really have a sales process. Neither of us were formally sales trained individuals, and we were made up the sales team.
Yeah, right.
We used to put a bunch of sticky notes, little Post-it notes on the window, and that was our.
You used to have a Post-it note on your door that called yourself the Revenue Doctor.
That's true. I did. I was hoping that wasn't going to come up today.
No, it's coming up today because that's what I'm saying. We're going to get to it because you were talking about nicknames, I think, right before we went live, and I was like, I had forgotten about that, and then between you did have that. It was a big Post-it note that you had on your door ticking down to your numbers, right? Like you would literally just tick them off. But I think above that was Josh Koza, the Revenue Doctor,
Yeah, I think I hung that up to get Chris motivated when he'd come in the office. He'd see that and he'd get him fired up.
This guy's doing some sales work today.
Yeah. But little did we know then, a couple Post-it notes on the windows in the lounge of our hot prospects of who we were going to try to sell that week. And, again, I think we referenced some of the numbers earlier, but I was looking back to it. 33 CEPAs signed up in Q4 of 2016, the end of that first year.
Okay.
Was 33 CEPAs, which is
33, for
total
like a class
signed up in over 3 months, right? 11 CEPAs a month signed up.
That was a big day. That was a big month, though,
right? And so
when you would sell like 10 and I would sell that one, and we're like, dude, we're at 11. This is great.
So I think structure and process just wasn't in place. That was the structural capital we always talk about. We had to build out with it. That didn't really exist then. I think that as we grew a little bit, there was who do we go to for what from a CEPA or community perspective? I think that there were struggles on who had ownership of what role, because as a small company, everyone does a little bit of everything. So who's responsible for which responsibility, I guess. Yeah. So I think that was a struggle. But again, I think just the vibe has always been positive, but it just felt heavier maybe, right? I think it just weighed on you a little bit more than, and we saw some personnel turnover in those years and then the years since. And I think that weeded out, not to go back to your landscaping days, looking up at the M&S picture there, but weeded out some of the people that just weren't built for that type of really hyper growth that we've gone into.
And super entrepreneurial culture again, too. I go back to, like, you created your role, right? I was like, these are the things that I think we need, and we played off a lot of each other. But if you weren't as resourceful, as motivated, or as entrepreneurial even back then, we probably still wouldn't have hit where we wanted to go generally, right? Because again, you just got me thinking about kind of weeding people out, and in the old days, like a pretty high amount of turnover. And not necessarily, I don't think it was because of like the culture or the company or the cause, but it's because people couldn't survive because they weren't getting a lot of guidance or coaching, because that's just not who we were, right? You were in this super entrepreneurial world where you're almost in like survival mode because you're just every dollar that you did make was being invested back into the business so that we could get to the next major milestone. And you just had like a reflective moment where it's not like that, certainly here anymore, right? And I mean, we'll get into what EPI looks like today, but very traditional entrepreneurial company, right? Like early days survival mode. We're trying to fill our 2 or 3 programs. We're trying to reinvest into the members and into the organization to take us to the next kind of milestone or level, which for me came in, I was talking about these like milestones of office transition. So now we go from 16 when you started, we go now to 19, and we outgrew our space. So we needed to get a new office space. It was it was basically early 2018, and in the winter, February of 2019, we ended up moving into the office that has become our home for the last 5 years here at the Exit Planning Institute. And I think that was our next biggest challenge, and the organization had certainly matured. And then we faced our pandemic. So I want to get into that next kind of milestone moment with you right after a short break. So stick with us, and we'll be back to talk about the big pivot that is the Exit Planning Institute.
For business owners, by a business owner. Walking to Destiny is your essential resource for understanding what makes your business highly profitable and significant. It becomes a business owner's handbook to know how to rapidly grow value and ultimately unlock the personal wealth trapped in business. Exit Planning Institute CEO Christopher Snider demonstrates how strategic exit planning will help you achieve improvements today while positioning you to build wealth for generations. Secure your success along other value creators. Discover, prepare, and decide what your walk to destiny will ultimately be. If executed correctly, these strategies can grow a business owner's wealth by 10 times. Walking to Destiny, the second edition, the 11 actions an owner must take to rapidly grow value and unlock wealth. Get your copy today at www.walkingtodestiny.com.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Exit Is Now podcast, hanging out with Josh Koza here from the Exit Planning Institute team, really talking about the evolution of the Exit Planning Institute and what it's like to grow a very entrepreneurial, and I'd like to think cutting edge kind of company. So before we took a break, we were talking about, we basically reviewed the foundation of where Josh kind of started, right? 2016 to really 2018, where for me, there was this another big pivot in our company, and talk about another layer of complexity, right? We moved out of a small Lakewood, again, basically like C-class kind of real estate space, into a office and industrial park in Westlake, Ohio, which is like a affluent neighborhood here in the Cleveland area where a lot of companies exist, into an A-class space. Took on our first big lease. It's $100,000 something a year in a 6,000 or 7,000 square foot office space. We were swimming at the time that we came in here. And if you fast forward then to the end of 2019, I keep this on my desk. This little cork is from a champagne bottle, because at the end of 2019, we had sold 500 CEPAs in a year. And it says December 18th of 2019. You can see this champagne cork right outside of this studio. This studio actually used to be my office. We popped this champagne, and nonetheless, it was a big moment. It was a big milestone moment. We had sold 500 CEPAs right in time for the Christmas holiday season and on December 18th. And we had celebrated moving into this office at the beginning of the year, hitting our 500th CEPA sold at the end of the year. It was quite a year. It was quite a time. A big transition over into this new office space.
Yeah, absolutely. And that moment, we popped that champagne and we had those confetti poppers we celebrated with when we hit that number. Man. And I remember stopping, pausing in the middle of the day to do that. And that moment, although the number was 400 that was in my head, when we celebrated that 500 CEPA mark, that took me back to the end of 2016. So again, back to the end of the first year that I was here. We were sitting in San Diego at our strategic retreat, which at that time was the entire company, because there was only, I think, five or six of us there sitting out there. So the whole team was there. And we were looking at 3-year goals and setting a BHAG, right? Our BHAG. And that was going to be, and Chris led that portion of the workshop. And we settled on, well, some of us settled on 400 CEPAs in a year in 3 years. So the year 2019, we would sell 400 CEPAs. And we had just finished, we were going to project to finish about 125 sold in 2016.
Okay. How many in 2016?
Like 125, 130
total in the year.
What we sold in the year, and then we were going to sell.
So the year that you started, 2016, we would have sold 125 CEPAs.
Yep, and we were projecting 3 years later we were going to sell 400. And to me, and maybe it was fresh out of working in a largest corporate role, or I think this is just maybe the difference between someone like you, more of a visionary than myself, is I thought that was absolutely crazy. And I told you and I told Chris that was no way that was going to happen. We could put up there as this big, hairy, audacious goal, but it wasn't going to happen. And I remember standing there, popping that champagne and thinking, we did it. This is crazy. And Chris still brings that up to me. He remembers when we sat there in San Diego. And so that was, for the company, a huge milestone. But for me personally, that was a pivotal moment where I then will sit there, and when you set these outlandish goals, or what some people might think are outlandish for the company, I say, well, we have the team to do it. Like I couldn't imagine doing that, and we did it. So I don't foresee a goal that we can set that we're not going to achieve, which is pretty cool. But I think if we, fast forwarding to 2019 and then rewinding a few months, that whole year wasn't, for me personally, the best year. And I think that this is we're still pre-COVID, and I think we'll get to the pivot in a moment. But and you remember, and some people here I might remember, I tried to quit. I sat you down in the office. I know, man. I tried to leave the company.
It was so unexpected to me too. I could tell you that when you walked in, he said, "Scott, I need to talk to you." So we sat in what's called the Enclave, which is just a room over from our studio today. And you're like, "Hey, man, I don't know if this is working. I don't know if I'm happy. I just is my official 2-week notice." And as I started the show, it's like your brother leaving. You're just like, what? Oh, what? I was like gasping for air. And I was like, and for our CEPAs that advise owners, at least in my entrepreneurial journey, we're always taught not to lose your A players and talk about a huge failure. I'm like, dude, I can't lose you.
Yeah,
that was wild.
And I walked in that day and knew I was walking in that meeting and thought I was leaving in 2 weeks. And before we left the Enclave, you said, well, I can't accept that. You're not quitting. I'm not going to let you do that. So let's figure out a way to to find a role and a position and responsibilities that make you happy and that you're going to thrive in, right? I think it was just the wrong position at the wrong time for me personally.
That's true.
And professionally. True. And so I think that a testament to you and to Chris and to the team here for allowing us to create that opportunity or to find the right opportunity and not let me leave, because I've many times since that day thought about how different my life would have been had I left, right? I don't even know what I would have been doing. I didn't have another job lined up, but it was just that stressful to me to want to do that. And so
that is good perspective, though, because at the time you were in a member experience role, right? But you were also in a management role, right? You were a member experience manager. So for those of you that don't understand the outline of EPI, our member experience role are the people working with our certified exit planning advisors in the community. So in charge of their well-being, helping them achieve their desires, helping them navigate some pain points, renewing their membership. And not only as the manager, you also had another big task at the time. That's when we were rolling out our Owner Roundtable series. And you were working with Chris in almost like a product development and management role too. So if you think about that and kind of just live reflecting about it, you had a lot of like spinning plates in the air, right? You had to manage and renew members. You had to manage and you had to manage people that were doing also that role. But then you had to work, almost manage up with the CEO of the Exit Planning Institute, Chris Snider, while developing one of his like passionate, like his baby kind of products, which is these owner roundtable series that we've seen a lot of success in. But yeah, a lot of moving plates and a lot of stress.
Yeah, and a lot going on personally. Our daughter Annabeth had just been born.
That's true.
That year as well, and
it's true.
And I think again we'll talk a little bit about the evolution of our core values.
Yeah, right.
But I don't feel that that the life balance was as pushed as strongly then as it is today. Not that it wasn't supported, but it's promoted now, and I know we'll get to that. So I think just the blend or trying to balance a personal life, young, new father, married, those responsibilities at work, it wasn't working for me. And so I was, prepared to leave. And again,
so you moved into a business development role though, right? Onto the sales team.
Yep. Yeah. We had, the year prior, I believe it was 2018, we brought Jesse on board to be director of business development. And the timing, I think, was good because we were planning, or he was planning on hiring another business development manager.
Right.
Scott Lang was already here. And so I was able to transition full time into a business development role.
Right. Totally different than what you were doing.
Very different. Yeah.
But gave you some hours back in your day, right? Or at least allowed you. I always think like the people sometimes think the life of a salesperson is like nice because you just make your own hours. You seemingly make a lot of money, but like you're the one taking phone calls on like Christmas Day morning or New Year's Eve or those kind of things. But it does give you some time for you to manage versus coming into the office and having to basically work like an 8 to 5. You can kind of manage your hours. But to your point of like work-life balance too, that certainly was not a core value of EPI back then. And even though we were much larger, I think in 2019, we're almost focused on what we were talking about in the first segment of the show, which was still a lot of growth, like really high impact, high intensity growth. And maybe selfishly, when I look to a guy like you, I think at that time too, you kind of start to take a guy like you for granted because you've just always been there grinding with me. But the different perspective, I think, for Josh too is like, dude, I don't own this business. So like like at the end of the day, that we might share similar passions. I have passions outside of this business, dude. And I also just had a new baby girl. So I got a lot going on in life right now, man. Like this grind of building this entrepreneurial company, my daily jive's got to change. So yeah, you moved into that business development role, which you sat in really from 19 till the beginning of this year for the most part.
Yeah. September-ish of 2019 through December of 2022.
Right. So now, everything, we had those kind of pivots and those perhaps hardships. We ended up having a great year, moved into a new role, sold 500 CEPAs. We have this big celebration just to take a downturn in 2020 with our global pandemic. And you always hear these pivot and pandemic stories, and it'd be interesting to get your perspective because what a time it was. I can remember I got back from a winter vacation in February with my family and to the COVID-19 coronavirus hitting the United States. And we used to host our in-person programs at colleges and universities. And Georgia State University had shut down just after I think Harvard was one of the first universities to shut down. And I remember calling them, Josh, and going, so if you're shut down, is your executive education center going to shut down? He goes, yeah, if the school shut down, the whole thing shut down, but we're not shut down yet, but we could shut down at any time. And I said, there's no freaking way that I'm shipping 80 people in to go get their CEPA credential on a Sunday to go to class Monday and Tuesday to wake up on Wednesday and cancel a CEPA program. So we ended up canceling the entire program, then canceled Cleveland in April, then canceled Chicago in May. And I think before the show you said, look, we actually sold 0 things in March and April. Like, what a time. And I think we're very much known for this pivot that people see in our product. We go from this in-person program to in 45 to 60 days, we launch an online education platform to continue to host our credentialing program. But like, what was that time like in your perspective of like March, April, May, just a total company pivot and pandemic going on?
Yeah, well, as a business development representative, a sales guy,
You just move into
selling
this new role.
in-person programs
Yeah.
at the beginning of the pandemic, a little bit difficult to swallow because there was nothing to sell.
Right.
So I think it was a lot of sitting around waiting for the online product to be launched. I mean, I wasn't directly involved with the release of that, but for me, when I think about the pivot that we talk about and that we made as an organization in 2020. We've talked a lot about the online platform, the online education. We went from in-person exclusively to online exclusively,
Right.
with the exception of the summit. For me, when I think back to that, is we pivoted as an organization in more ways than just the products we were selling. And for me, sitting at home, a sales team was the first team to go home, and then shortly after, everyone was working remotely and not selling much of anything.
Right.
I was never concerned that I was going to have a paycheck and we were going to make it through that. And I think that's a testament to you and to Chris as leaders of this organization. I know I have friends. We all have friends. We have family members who were laid off or at least furloughed for a period of time and probably wondering how they were going to make ends meet as a result of that. And that was never something I was worried about. You never had to lay anyone off. Nobody was ever furloughed. Nobody took any less pay, and I've told you before, but thank you for that. And that's really
You're welcome.
another defining moment for me. I think in this, in my career here is that level of stability and investment, and that was a period of time where I think you and Chris then decided to double down and invest more, right? I think we talk into kind of coming out of that. We launched the products and the cultural change we've experienced here is not only did we make it through that time, but now we're gonna invest even more in our people.
It was pretty wild, man. You'd really taken me down memory lane here. I mean, it wasn't too long ago when that happened, obviously, but yeah, I mean, me and Chris we said, look, we're not laying anybody off. We're not furloughing anybody. We're not doing that. We're not doing that to our people generally. From a more strategic business side of things, we said, we're going to recover during this pandemic. And when we do, we want the same people here that's been helping us grow. Because again, at that time, 2019 into 2020, like the big challenge we were having before the pandemic was every single CEPA program, we were having about 9 to 10 in-person programs a year, was selling out. 80, 85. I think we used to cap around 85 people in person so that we could do group work, effective group work. And our biggest struggle back then was, well, how the hell do we scale this thing? Because all of our programs friggin' sold out this year. And yeah, I think just from a pure business standpoint, we also said, look, we want the people that have gotten us to this point to stay here so that we can continue to scale together, because we thought we had at the time, certainly the right talent, skill set that we needed. And then, on a personal standpoint, we're just like, that's not who we are. We're not going to do that in a time of need, and a time where everybody was kind of navigating, even my dad for that matter, right? Navigating stuff for the very first time. So that's an interesting perspective, because I think a lot of times when companies, including us, think about pivot, we go to how we pivoted, like our products and how we survived. I think another big thing that I think it would be an interesting perspective to have from you is during that time, we also quite literally ripped the old core values off of the wall and put new ones up basically a year later. I think we took them down actually before we even made them. And we said, look, we don't believe in those things anymore because of who we are now through this pandemic. Because I'd like to think that, if you look at that time, we kind of made the pivot in 2020, actually stabilized, right? We didn't necessarily, we lost maybe a couple 100,000 of revenue, but we didn't really take a deep dive because we were able to make that pivot. And then by the end of 21, we I feel is like a nice stabilized period, not just from a X's and O's P&L standpoint, but from a culture and people standpoint as well, because I think the pandemic really took a toll on us as individuals and as a unit, as an organization. But literally, I think at the end of 21, we take down the core values, we put new ones up, and it probably since your journey started in 2016, you actually were able to help us create the new core values, where when you arrived at EPI, those core values already existed. You didn't although you might have bought into them, you didn't really have a say in them. Way different in 2021 when we rewrote them.
Yeah, and everyone at the company had to say in them. It was a company, it was the end of your workshop that we sat down and we said, we're going to leave this room with a new set of core values. And we had gone through a round of leadership development training. I think that's where the idea spawned of really taking an inward look at what those core values are, and do they really represent who we are today and who we want to be? Like, do they align with are they our core values? And so that was a really cool opportunity. Again, something that I had never experienced, that I'm sure nobody here at the time had ever had the opportunity to experience. To have an input into the new core values that hang on our wall when you walk in, that we believe in, that we use as a part of our hiring process now when we onboard new employees. So that was a really cool opportunity. I think we've settled on, and each year you take the time and ask, do we still believe this is who we are? And do we believe there needs to be any that change? And they haven't changed since that time. So I think we did a good job of picking the right ones, or defining who we are as an organization and what's most important.
And if you think about it too, Josh, with the core values too, what I love about our people today is not only do we say, look, we're not going to change them, we still believe in them, but we can actually provide examples, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll go around a room at any given quarterly renewal and say, in the last 90 days, well, first off, we'll go through them and we'll say, do we believe in these? Yes or no? And we'll have maybe a debate, maybe around the description, like the core value exists. Maybe it's implemented in a different way. Maybe we should evolve the way we're thinking about this value. But then we go around the room for probably a half hour and give examples of how each of us, or how we have seen the core values lived. So in those last 90 days at that quarterly renewal that we do, a part of the value acceleration methodology, which I also think has been kind of an interesting thing as well for us. I think since those core values went up, another thing that we've seen, certainly you've seen, is I think Chris and I, our leadership team, and our whole organization has really leaned hard into the value acceleration methodology. Had Chris on the show a bunch of times talking about how he's leaned into the personal and estate planning. I think for us, we've really leaned into the business planning. But nevertheless, I think that, what is your perspective, I guess, on how we're living the value acceleration methodology over the past couple of years in particular, and has that had an impact on you and your role?
Yeah, I think it's always been a unique concept for me that we're living, breathing examples, or a case study of what we're teaching, right? And I thought that always made it an easy thing to position to a prospective CEPA or to a prospective partner firm. Is like, this isn't just some concept that Chris came up with and we're throwing at a wall and hoping it sticks. Like, Chris has done this with clients, but we do this this is how
we're actively building a business with it.
We run our own business the same way, right? That exit strategy is business strategy. I think that as entrepreneurs, you and Chris have always known that at some point you're going to exit EPI and potentially some more companies. But I think when I first started, and in those first couple of years, it wasn't as imminent, right? But I think now, as we grow into a more mature organization, we talk about decentralization of ownership, and so we've I think done a good job of decentralizing Chris from day-to-day operations. And you're at the center of it, and I think we've transitioned to how do we start to decentralize Scott from the center of the business. So I think a more concerted effort in those areas is something that has really changed over the last couple of years. I think surrounding, as we grow in an organization, surrounding yourself with leaders that can run their departments or teams, not independently, but accountability with authority, one of our core values, right? You let them make those decisions and run the teams they want to, ultimately having some sort of metrics that they have to be responsible for. I think transparency to employees. The question comes up when we do faculty meetups is, when should an owner tell their employees they're looking to sell? Do they keep that secret? When do we educate them on that? And you and Chris are open and honest with that internally, right? To say, here's what we're envisioning as our potential plan. Chris is obviously looking to exit and move into his third act sooner than you would be. So that's a unique dynamic. But I think that's another area that stuck out to me, is that level of transparency. So people aren't wondering, hey, we talk about exit planning. When are we going to sell? Like, when are ours going to sell? Are we going to exit? And so again, I think it all goes back to we're living, breathing case study of exit planning in action.
For two guys that kind of help run the business, right? So there's for our audience, right? When you talk about value acceleration methodology, you talk about value acceleration in maybe three ways. When we talk about building value, we talk about literally building value in the company. We talk about building value in the personal financial strategies of the owners. And we talk about building value in the personal planning, the vision, the where we want to be in the next phases of life. Again, you heard me talk a little bit just a moment ago. I think Chris has really leaned into the personal and personal financial planning, and maybe naturally, right? Chris is in his early 60s. We've decentralized him from the day-to-day, the operations, the direction of the company. And I think that us on the leadership team now are really focused on building value in the business, right? I certainly have my own focus on the personal and personal financial. But when I think about how we're embracing it from a business perspective, I think about those 4 intangible capitals that Chris talks to. And when I sit here with you and taking me down this memory lane, you started talking about what that looked like when you came into EPI. No real job description, sticky notes on the wall that was like almost like I used to call it like my suspect lineup. In a career before this, folks, for our listeners, I really wanted to be like a police officer, an FBI agent. Yeah, like I think it was more specifically in high school, I really thought being like a U.S. Marshal was like, that's where I was going to go. Like when I started looking at colleges, I was looking at colleges with ROTC programs. I had this talk about visionary, right? I had this vision for my life kind of mapped out. That ended up, thank God, I guess it didn't work out for me, because talk about I don't know what I would be doing if I was doing that, because I can't picture myself really doing, what I'm not doing what I'm doing today. But nonetheless, when I think about the 8-year trajectory of you, 16 all the way to today, it has gotten way more complex and way more formal. If we were sitting here 8 years ago, we would have been in T-shirts and ball caps. Now we sit here today, and he's like a well-dressed guy. I have probably like 2-month-old jeans on that haven't been washed. It's certainly a lot cleaner than me. Nonetheless, I can see everybody laughing behind the glass, like, what's this guy talking about? But nonetheless, much more complex and formal. Today, we talk about very deliberate 3 to 5 year strategy creation. We, without doubt, have job descriptions. We talk about process and methodology. We have a sales strategy that's much better than the sticky notes sitting on the windows. And we're approaching our 25th employee with a trajectory to hit 30 in the next 6 to 8 months. So way different than the 5 that we had when you started. But what do you think about kind of seeing maybe the word that I'm looking for, Josh, is like the maturity level of, honestly, even me and you, let alone the organization. And if you think about that stages of business growth, going from a very, maybe not even deliberate, but like very visionary, focused on execution, the revenue doctor type realm, to now a very process-oriented company with pretty detailed complexities that we're trying to navigate. It has to be a different culture. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's completely different. I think it's a very, I think everyone here carries an ownership mindset, though. I think that everyone thinks about that. I don't want to speak for everyone, but it seems to me that everyone thinks about what they're doing today. How does that contribute to the long-term value of this organization, right? And I think by keeping the 4 intangible capitals top of mind for the employees, that becomes an automatic thought of what I'm doing today. Am I documenting this process correctly? Like, how is this adding to the structural capital? How are we, partly in my new role, how are we looking at customer diversification, customer capital, right? What are those, what am I doing today that's driving value into the company versus I just come and do my job and leave? That's not the vibe I get from the employees here, is that it's a 9 to 5 punch card, time clock, in and out, get that paycheck and go have fun on the weekend. I think everyone's always thinking about what they can do to bring value. I think that there's a platform for that here in many ways, whether it's employee satisfaction surveys, whether it's the quarterly renewals. I think that the end of year retreat that now we have the entire company contribute to what you would call the pre-retreat before the strategic retreat. So everyone has ample opportunity to contribute ideas. One of the things I was thinking about before today was the big idea competition that we do every year, right? True. The ability for an employee at the Exit Planning Institute to come up with an idea, a concept, something that would drive revenue, add efficiencies, de-risk the business, and present it to the entire company. We vote on those, and there's a winner selected every year, and there's a monetary incentive for that. Again, something that I don't think many organizations, companies have that opportunity. And so I think all of those little things that we do helps each individual employee have a little bit more of that ownership mindset.
I think that's interesting perspective. So the one thing I was writing down as you were talking about that, when you do pause and reflect, is we haven't, in our hiring process, we haven't lost some of the core values or maybe the core elements than that we had when we hired you. Is that we wanted somebody that was independent, resourceful, ambitious, somebody that wanted to purposefully grow, somebody that liked opportunity and that is entrepreneurial. So if you do think about the across 25 or something people that we have now, I think you're right. Everybody does have a sense of those maybe more subconscious elements of hiring that we had back 8 years ago. But I like your comments on, and I hope the audience picks up on that, particularly our business owners that might be listening, is Josh just described a mindset that's not just income, but it's also income and value. It's one of the mindset shifts that many owners have to make when they're sitting talking about exit planning or trying to embrace the value acceleration methodology. Many of us as owners have spent a lifetime in business concentrating on income generation and not focused on value creation. And I think the deeper dive, talk about questions that we get a lot inside of the CEPA program, is how do you train your employees to start to think like that as well? It's one thing to have the owner think value and income. The owner participates really in the upside value. So how do I get my employees to start thinking about it? And you just described a little bit about your perspective on how you come in every day thinking in terms of value and income. I want to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk to Josh about the future of exit planning, the future of the Exit Planning Institute, what we're calling it today, the evolution of exit planning. So stick with us. We'll be right back.
The Exit Planning Institute is the authority in exit planning. With its award-winning process, the value acceleration methodology provides deep insights into how to help business owners create more significant companies while blending and aligning their business, personal, and financial goals. EPI brings together the world's most elite exit planning advisors to form the EPI community. The EPI community represents over 15,000 professional advisors worldwide, including its 5,000 certified exit planning advisors. These advisors include financial advisors, growth consultants, CPAs, attorneys, M&A advisors, amongst others, who come together to expand their knowledge, create and innovate, network and relationship build, grow their practices, and better attract and engage business owner clients. Join EPI today and gain access to the community, content, courses, credential, and conference that you as the professional advisor need in order to harness the opportunity with small to lower middle market business owners who strive to grow a company of significance, thus having a highly valuable and transferable company. Follow the Exit Planning Institute on LinkedIn and visit earncepa.com to learn more about the community leading the exit planning profession.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Exit Is Now podcast. So we've kind of come through over the last hour or so Josh's trajectory, this 8-year run of his career here at the Exit Planning Institute. If you're just tuning in, our longest running employee, and somebody that has seen really almost like a startup business truly grow. So as we sit here today, Josh, we said we started with something like 500 CEPAs. We were selling 125 per year, a small summit, a handful of chapters. Today, as we sit, we have 5,000 certified exit planning advisors, nearly 25 employees. We had 650 people at our summit this year and anticipated 800 people coming next year, about 25 chapters. And what we talk about today, probably the most, in my opinion, talk about the future, 10,000 other advisors hanging out in the community or more that don't necessarily have the CEPA credential, but do love the content, the courses, the chapters, and so on and so forth. So you have moved at the beginning of this year, moved into the executive team role, which I think is a natural fit. And in particular, on that executive team, you now oversee all of EPI's strategic relationships. So tell us about that role and what that looks like.
Yeah, I think one of the first parts of that role is to identify what is a strategic relationship for EPI, right? And I think that's in part why this role was designed and created to start this year, is to say, what does it mean to be a strategic partner or have a strategic relationship with EPI? Who are those, and how do we engage with them? And then how do we integrate them within the CEPA community? Mm-hmm. I think what we've found, or what I've started to find or identify over the first half of this year, is there's really two key types of large relationships. And I would identify those as simply put, those organizations that represent a business development opportunity for the Exit Planning Institute. Okay. And those organizations or partners for which the Exit Planning Institute represents a business development opportunity. Yeah. Right. You're right. So a partner who has a solution that CEPAs can utilize to enhance their practice. Right. Or firms that we can grow our community within. Yep. I'm thinking of like kind of national account relationships. Yeah, sure. If you think back to the last 8 years, I guess we keep talking about here, those key thrusts have always been, when we've kind of brought on a new national account relationship. Yeah. Right. And we talk about how UBS was the first large organization in 2017 to approve and adopt this CEPA credential. And that was a huge thrust for the organization. And we've seen those in the years since. And so I think we'll continue to see those, but those organizations are getting fewer and fewer, as most of these large institutions, financial institutions, have approved the credential already. There's certainly some out there that I think present an opportunity. But as the CEPA community grows within those institutions and just as a whole, we need to continue to provide them with solutions that help them grow their practice. Right. I think when I think about it is CEPA or exit planning for most of these advisors isn't their core business. It's secondary or supplementary to what they do. They don't need CEPA to be a successful advisor. Right. I would argue that they need CEPA to successfully engage with business owners if that's their clientele. But as a financial advisor, you don't have to be a CEPA to be successful. Sure. Right. I think that. So for those who do want to work with business owners who obtain the designation and credential, are working in this ecosystem, how does the Exit Planning Institute continue to provide them with tools, resources, education opportunities that allow them to grow their practice and better engage with business owners? And that's the other half of the relationships. Right. It's a pretty long answer, I guess, for what does your job description look like today? No, I can appreciate
it. I think that we could also tell that it's also a talk about evolving. You're going all the way back to 2016 where we're like, hey, Josh, we think we need this. Here's no job description. Go out, create that, and then enhance all of our relationships, right? It's kind of weird thinking about the evolution of your role, because as you were talking too, it's so weird that I don't know if the universe just aligns or if it's a charted path for us, or it's funny because I don't think you would be as successful at this role if you didn't have the past 8 years under your belt. Because think about what the strategic relationship role does embrace. You know about our events, how they're run, what the experience is like is there. You know about the programs and the education because you've done it. Then you know about managing members and member relationships and what's meaningful to the member, their pain points, their desires. You know about business development, right? Like the more transactional side. What here's the CEPA program. This is why it's impactful. Come in and sell it and become a CEPA. You know about developing the relationships with key people like our chapter presidents or national accounts. You know about strategy. You know about execution of that strategy and how to create and maybe create new opportunities as well. So it's all of that smushed together in a new role that we're calling manager of strategic relationships. I actually think that I don't know if there's a better person made for that role. The other thing that we're talking about, and it'd be interesting to see your perspective as somebody internally, not an advisor out in the marketplace, but somebody as an executive business leader here at EPI, we're talking a lot about this loose theme this year around the evolution of exit planning. We saw it come out in Walking to Destiny 2.0, the second edition, just a couple of months ago. We saw it loosely themed at the summit, and we continue to talk about it because the market is evolving as well. If you look over the next 3 years, or even just take the next 2 to your 10-year anniversary at EPI, where are we going? What are you passionate about? Where do you think that the organization and the profession is headed?
Yeah, 10 years is diamonds, right? So I do like watches are nice.
You like you are a big watch guy. I'll get you a diamond watch for the 10-year anniversary instead of that pop the bottle Dom champagne.
Hey, that's one way to keep employees around for 10 years.
Just buy them diamond watches and champagne.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll note it.
No, I think that's a good question. Well, what does the next 2-3 years look like for EPI? I think certainly CEPA growth. I think that the CEPA community grows from 5,000. Is it 7,000, 10,000, 20,000? I don't know what that number is, but that's going to continue to grow. But I think maybe even the larger opportunity is that community number, right? We say we work with 15,000 or engage with 25,000 advisors in the community. I think that we've always said, I've always said that CEPA may not be the right fit for every individual advisor, even if they're engaging with business owners, right? CEPA is not necessarily the answer, but some level of education is. So I think the areas of EPI Academy, where there's educational opportunities for advisors to better understand either specific concepts within the methodology or having a more educated conversation with a business owner. And I think it's additional coaching, support, education internally at some of these firms, right? I think that an organization has 10, 15, 20, 150 individuals or 500 at the high end, that have CEPA within them. We would talk about, so what now? Well, like what's next? What's the next thing for those organizations? What can we provide for them that will continue to enhance their practices and grow their firms as much as it's growing EPI?
Yeah. Well, Josh, I appreciate you hanging out. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. You'll see, if you don't know Josh, you should absolutely know Josh. You'll see him out and about in our community. Big second half of the year for you. He has presented his strategic relationship plan, and we'll see him out in the community. But with that, guys, next show is August 16th. Tune in live at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Subscribe, listen, and leave a review on all of our podcast platforms. Thanks, guys, and thanks, Josh.
Thanks for having me on.